nice to see you all here with us.
Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. We really appreciate being able to gather today, and we really appreciate being able to get in. We were a little bit worried, like, did we have the wrong link? All those anxiety.
Oh, you had the wrong person who wasn't experienced with it. So apologies.
We're going to talk a little bit today about resisting this idea of perfectionism, and you couldn't have started us off better, Leanne. You are doing just fine. All right, so I am just setting up my visuals so I can see all the things I want to look at the same time. Alex, my audio's okay?
Perfect.
All right, you can see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right. Well, hey, everybody, how are you? My name's Chris Foreman. I am calling in from southern Wisconsin, which is not too far from where we all hoped we would be gathering right now in Chicago. And I'm going to get us started today in our workshop, helping the helper, moving from what is to what could be. But first, to break the ice and to just give us all a reason to laugh and start off with our collective humanity, I wanted to invite you in the chat to say hello to each other and to offer one of your funniest coping strategies from COVID. We've used this prompt a couple of times, and I promise you there will be some funny ha-ha strategies and some funny ooh kind of strategies. And if lots of people share, there will be lots of laughs. I'll start verbally just to set the tone. Like I said, I live in southern Wisconsin, and a few years ago, my husband and I took up cycling, road biking. And, you know, we were former runners, so cycling was really fun and we enjoyed doing it together. But when COVID happened, it really amped up because cycling out on the road, you really could forget for quite a while that COVID, there was this pandemic out there and the world seemed to be crumbling around us. There was no concern about masks. There was no concern about safety. And so we started doing it a lot. And let me say that I'm 51 years old. And this midlife crisis version for me means going out in public in spandex bike shorts with padding on purpose. And just in case that isn't awful enough, because for me, that was pretty awful. That is not something I ever thought I would be doing. By the end of this summer, I started buying chafing cream, saddle cream, because we were spending as many hours on our bikes, sometimes 50 miles a day, that I started to buy saddle cream, chafing cream in bulk. And that's when I had that moment of, I'm not sure this coping strategy is quite all that's wrapped up to be anymore. But wow, the things we do to get through the things that we go through. So please have a moment to laugh with us and share some of your moments. I have to admit, after listening to the plenary, I thought, wow, that was such a powerful, moving opening panel. Do I still start with a joke? And then I thought, well, actually, maybe that's exactly what we all need, is a moment to laugh and remember to laugh with each other and be a community here as we start to talk about another really hard topic. So I am going to talk a little bit about my experience. I work in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and my job is to work with organizations across the United States who are serving kids and families who've experienced child traumatic stress. And so I'm talking to people across the country in every single service system I can imagine, from schools to behavioral health, inpatient, outpatient, family peer support providers, young adult peer support providers, MDs and clinicians and researchers. And what I noticed even pre-COVID was this emerging theme from people all over doing the work. And the theme was this: they were called to do the work, deeply committed to doing amazing work, and utterly exhausted. They talked about staff turnover being sometimes 50, 60% a year. Things were constantly falling apart, and they were holding it together with their knuckles white. And the sentiment that I heard in various words was, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And so I started to see what I now call what is. And what is are systems that were designed to help people that are actually causing great harm to those who are working within them. And so from there, we started to talk about wellness as a social justice issue. Because as we dug in, we realized that it was so much this lack of wellness, this harm was so much steeped into this idea of mental health stigma and a culture of white supremacy where sick people make each other sicker. But once we started to recognize what is, we got to imagine what could be, where behavioral health, where advocacy and peer support actually makes everyone in it healthier, and healthy people are making each other healthier regardless of where or how they are involved in the system. Where those of us who are offering services and help don't have to just accept that our suffering and harm to us is an inevitable cost of helping others, and that the people who deserve the best from us aren't getting just whatever we have left. So as we continue this conversation today, we thought we would start with what is in our field so that we can collectively also notice what could be, especially for those of us who come to this work as helpers because of our lived experience and expertise.
And Chris, I'm going to thank you. Yeah, I was just got a request to make the slide bigger. Thank you for that.
Yep, thank you. So again, what is? The first bucket here is this idea that we sign on to do the impossible and then feel like personal failures when we aren't able to achieve it. And this idea of personal sacrifice baked throughout. When was the last time your work, your agency, your service was evaluated based on your personal wellness? Or when was the last time someone asked you at your organization, what can we do organizationally to help you and support your well-being as you do this super hard and super important work? Sacrifice is so ingrained. I don't think, my hypothesis is we don't really even think about it. It's just assumed that we will sacrifice. Next, think about, for a minute, just reflect on how often you hear or talk about the families and the youth that you serve, how brave they are, how courageous they are for asking and seeking help, how vulnerable and courageous it is for someone to come and ask for help, and how excited we are when they do, because we're so excited to be helpful. If that's true, that is bravery and courage, and we also buy into this idea that doing this work and expecting not to be impacted is like walking through water and expecting not to get wet. Why isn't it more common that we're talking with each other about all the help that we're seeking out for ourselves as well as we're doing this work? And finally, this idea of doing more with less and less and less. This is such an interesting concept because when I first started out, and I'm a social worker, when I first started out in the field, I worked through this organization, and shortly after I was hired, it was we have to tighten our belts moment. We all have to figure out how to do less because our resources are getting cut, our contracts are getting cut, our budget's going to be different. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm in it. I'm committed to this work. We're going to have to do less. And I remember also thinking, and then there will be times of more. I am now so conditioned that I don't even question the idea of doing less with less anymore and expect there ever to be a more. I just have been conditioned and acculturated to less is always the way it is, and we're always figuring out how to make cuts, and the more just has not happened in 20 plus years. So if any of this resonates, go into the chat and say so. We really, would love to be in person. And since we can't, we want to make this as interactive and conversational as possible. If any of this doesn't resonate or you want to push back on it, that's great too. We want this to be a conversation and a real honest one at that. And then I think what we're going to do is go ahead and have Alex take us through some of these real life examples of what this looks like in their experience, in their career as a peer support provider, as an advocate, as a student intern, and now as an MSW, because, and I'm going to steal something I think Stacy said at the end of the plenary, because it was so powerful for me. We aren't going to stop telling stories until the stories change. And what I think Alex is going to bring to the table in a minute is that these are also stories that need to be told, and the stories that need to be changed if we're going to achieve the goal of actually making services available the way that they need to be available and helpful the way that they actually need to be helpful.
Oh,
Alex?
Chris, thank you for that, Chris. That was beautiful the way you set that up. And hi to you all. Thank you all so much for joining us today in this conversation, and so appreciated, by the way, the funnies in the chat. Chris, while I'm talking, you should review some of those funnies. It was pretty good. But welcome to you all. My name is Alex Barker. I am someone that has an MSW, but I like to say that I lead with both my lived expertise and my professional experience as well. I see this degree as more as a tool, not part of my identity necessarily. I got into this work because, as like Chris was saying, I have a story to share. And I got into this work because several years ago, I was a teen, a young adult going through some hard times, and I accessed behavioral health systems and the hospitals and things like that because I needed help. And when this first idea of stigma that Chris had talked about, I really look at that and remember the first time I ran into it was when I was in kind of this role of like the client, right? Or however you want to label that. And, you know, I saw out there in the world the messages from like a lot of our local agencies and hospitals and places saying, hey, if you need help, reach out and get help. There's no judgment. We just want to support you. It's okay to not be okay. And I really took that to heart, especially as someone who was young and feeling pretty directionless at the time. And so I went into that system and I did get a lot of good help from some people. And I also experienced a lot of harm as well. What I experienced, it really confounded me and confused me. I found that at times when I went to get help, especially if I was in crisis, I was met with someone that it felt to me I was a burden, honestly, for their workday or for their day. And come to find out, I was actually probably the 700th person on their caseload for that day. You know, I would get confused. I would be called attention seeking or something, and I could feel the agitation and the aggravation from providers and nurses and, you know, anybody that was around. And I walked away going, what did I do, you know, to make someone feel that way? And the actual truth is, y'all, is I found out that stigma isn't just what we think about when we think about how people receiving services can be stigmatized, but it's also well within and ingrained within our systems that we're working in. And I found this out as I moved into a peer support role, sharing my lived experience and story of recovery to help other young adults like myself. And I found out that when I became involved in the system as this helper role, as I went through my peer support experience and as I went through my experience in going into social work, I found that this personal sacrifice kind of stuff is really baked throughout. And I didn't realize it initially until I kind of ended up a few years later talking with Chris and having these conversations. But I'll share with you all, when I got into peer support and I got into this work and was going for my bachelor's in social work, you know that we have to do these internships or we have to do some training to get us prepared for the jobs that we do. Well, I was working 40 hours a week. I was a peer support specialist and I was going for my bachelor's full time in school. And I had a 20-hour-a-week internship on top of it at the time. So I would work 8 to 5 at my job. And then from like 5 to 9, I would go across the street and work at the crisis unit. Then I would go to class throughout the other days that I could fit them in too. And, you know, the assignments and stuff on top of that. You know, I was exhausted, and a lot of us are exhausted from this. And I didn't realize it at first, but that's not okay. That wasn't healthy for me. I started making some pretty destructive decisions in my life, and I got really burnt out and tired, but I didn't feel like I could ask for help. And I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about how burnt out I was feeling because nobody else around me was saying that they were going through the same thing. So I felt like, you know, as this up and coming young professional, as this student of social work, I felt like I needed to pull myself up, get myself together and just work harder because that was the answer to fixing this problem. And so, Chris, do you mind going to the next slide? I wanted to share that story with you all today because it's definitely reflective, I think, of maybe many of the experience that some maybe folks in our group today have had. My experience doesn't account for everyone's, but I mean, how many of you in this room, for instance, how many of you may not even have a lot of paid time off because maybe you only get 8 months of vacation hours every month that you get paid? I know I did. Or how many of you are sitting here today with a ton of hours banked for your paid time off, but you can't take them or you don't take them because it takes forever to catch up on the work, to put things in place, or you can't even leave because there's not enough people to cover you. You know, the longer I have been in this role, the longer I have been in these positions, and the more I start to gain experience. Keep in mind, I've only been doing this 5 years now. I'm seeing this more and more, y'all. And as I've gotten to this point now as this MSW, I feel like it's been even harder to ask for help or to feel comfortable not knowing how to do something because I feel like, oh, I have these letters behind my name now and I should be competent in everything I do. Meanwhile, I just kind of started off, to be quite honest. Chris, can you advance the slide? And so that brings me to my little funny here with my comic. It's funny here, right? So the boss, you got the boss with all his paperwork. So no rush with these hops and take all weekend if necessary. My goodness, I don't know how many times I have felt like that, but I certainly have many. If I had $1 for every time I felt like that, I'd probably not need to do social work anymore. But I'm curious to know from you all too, as Chris kind of puts up some prompts on this slide, we're kind of met with these challenges, right? What kind of seems to resonate to you the most as you look at these two sentences? We talk about grants, right? Like if we lost our grants or foundation funding, I'd be out of a job or my program would close. And then you have this other statement of, our building is safe. We have enough people to do the work well. There's ample coverage for time off when people need it. And we use grants to innovate. We use grants to kind of drive our work forward in that way. For me, I'll be honest with you all, the first one is mostly true. In my last 5 years of doing this work, every position I've had has been solely relied upon by grant funding. And had that grant funding not been around, I wouldn't have had a job anymore. These are the types of things that we deal with within our systems. And so as a result, we do more with less and less and less. And families, unfortunately, tend to get not really the rest of us. And it's not the best of what we can offer in terms of care and support. And Chris, I've talked a lot. Do you have anything you'd like to add to this? Because I see you shaking your head over there like it's resonating with you.
It was just completely resonating with me, Alex. Absolutely.
You can move on. Let's see, to our next slide.
All right.
Can you hear me okay, Chris, by the way? I'm having a couple audio issues.
Yeah, you sound good to me. If anybody can't hear Alex well in the chat, please let them know. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to use the chat, the thumbs up, whatever indication that you are willing and able to do for us, which feels true for you. I fantasize about winning the lottery, even though I never have time or maybe the money to buy a ticket. Yeah, this is way too close to the bone to be funny anymore. I feel great. Wear this biosensor so management can monitor your health. Yay. Why? Because somebody isn't at their very wit's end and therefore they can afford to take on more. How do we retain our top performers? Keep them so busy and exhausted they can't have the energy to apply somewhere else. It's not hot in here. Everybody keeps jumping out and I'm the only one here. I actually had a little thing on this once before, like, how long have you been a supervisor? 3 years. How long have you been at the agency? 2.5. That constant turnover where all of a sudden you look around and you're the only one that's left and everybody else is left. And you're wondering, Is it me? Why am I still here, or is it them? I just haven't even noticed. I've been so busy doing the work. I haven't thought about it. So we would love to be able to use Mentimeter to just create a word cloud. Because remember, we're talking about noticing what is, not as a point of disheartenment, although it can be really disheartening to think about it. But once you notice what is, you can imagine what could be. And just imagining what could be is the first step in it, trying to get there. So we invite you to go to menti.com, and you really need to go to menti.com, and because otherwise, if you just Google Mentimeter, it'll come up funky on you. But go to menti.com and it'll ask you for the code, and this is the code. And the question we ask, or we want to put in the word cloud, is this: what would be different if we had everything we needed to do our work? Now, this isn't the magic wand, everything I ever wanted, a big, massive amount of foundation funding where I could wave my magic wand and it's all better. This is just the basics to do the work that needs to be done. And I'm going to quick switch us over to Menti. Alex, have you tried to use this, and is the technology working for us?
Yes, Chris, I think it's working for us. Just go, folks, just a second. Yeah, I see on the chat, some folks were asking, do you want us to do this now? Yes, please go ahead and feel free to type those in. Yeah. What would be different if we had everything we needed to do our work?
Yes, compassion, satisfaction, time to notice. Appreciation. Happiness to do work daily. You know, I have this thing that I talk about in different groups, but doing good work should feel good. And I don't use the word should very often because I feel like that's such a judgy labeling word, but good work can feel good. And actually, I think good work should feel good. Exhale, gratitude, energy. And it's interesting because some of these words are absolutely about the people doing the helping, or paid roles, paid positions, formal positions to help. They're also, if we think about it, back to this idea of social justice, allowing us to be the best versions of ourselves when we are helping, which means that the people we're helping are getting the better parts of us, like increased productivity, compassion, satisfaction, time to breathe, excitement. That all creates a ripple effect of this idea of healthier people being able to make each other healthier. Recognition. Yeah. Being connected. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. That was one of the concrete things we tried, was connection. And it felt so scandalous to spend time on connection alone, and was so key to some of the work that we feel really proud of now. Shall we, Alex?
We shall.
Okay. Thanks for everyone for playing along with that. We really appreciate it. We find this inspiring. I hope it's sort of is a source of inspiration for others too. A lot would be different if we had everything we needed, just needed to do the work, not wanted, needed.
You know, I saw in our word cloud that we just put up, Chris, thank you for that Mentimeter. I always love when we do those. I saw a couple folks, mention a couple things in there that leads me to this slide. Some people talked about high turnover rates. right? And how that is an issue, and it's a huge challenge in our systems and organizations. We see a lot of high turnover rates. We see people getting burnt out. We see people stressed out, and maybe even leaving the field, the helping professions altogether, whatever that role looks like for you. Just want to draw your attention to this iceberg for a moment, okay? So, we all I love a good iceberg metaphor. Above the waterline, we know that these are the things we're seeing: the high turnover rates, the people being burnt out, maybe even leaving the field altogether, right? If we want to take those, though, if we want to address some of these, we have to start looking just a little bit, though, below that waterline. And below that waterline is going back to what Chris kind of opened us up with earlier, is this stigma and this white supremacy that is pretty inherent within our systems, our organizations, and our agencies. These things, for instance, like not feeling like you can make a mistake because we have to be perfect, because we have the MSWs, or we're a peer support person that's done this for 20 years and we have enough experience to know that we know everything. Or this sense of urgency. I got to move quicker so I can move quicker and get more done and get more to be productive. These are the types of examples I'm talking about when I talk about this stigma and this white supremacy. These are the things that often lay below that waterline. And these are the things, guys, that we don't always talk about a lot, because this is a hard conversation, right? To really just open up and acknowledge the fact that we in these systems we have harm, right? Even though we're not maybe the client or the community being served, we are harmed in these systems as well. And so I got to thinking about this, right? Like the whole stigma thing and the white supremacy, and like how this influences high turnover rates and burnout and things like that. And I started thinking back to that internship example, that experience that I had, where I was like burnt out, stressed out, up to here, so tired. And I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about it because I'm a hard worker and working hard is what's going to get me through it. Well, I want to have you look at this tree and the roots and the trunk, especially. Once you look at the values and the beliefs and the assumptions, and think about this as I kind of just share my story a little bit, in terms of for yourself. But, for me, that value of hard work, I'm from Southern West Virginia. I was born and raised in Appalachia. The crux of our family and the core of who I am is that value. But when is this serving me well? When is it serving the work well? And when is it not? And what I mean by that is that hard work wasn't going to get me through that internship okay. Hard work, the way that I was using that value, was not helping me in my internship at all. It wasn't helping me to be healthy whatsoever. So I've had to take a step back myself and go, okay, what does that value mean to me, really? What does that hard work mean to me? And over the last 6 months, especially after having these conversations with Chris, I have found that I need to look at that value in my beliefs and my assumptions a little bit deeper so that I can actually tie into what's working in this work and what's not. Because inevitably, the places we grew up, the perceptions that we have, the values and beliefs that we hold, these all influence our iceberg in the situation that we're dealing with over here. I think now, in terms of this value of hard work, for instance, I think of that as, what? Yeah, that is my value. And hard work to me also means rest. Hard work to me also means saying, no, I am not working right now because I don't feel well. Hard work to me means saying to myself, yes, I do have an MSW, but guess what? I still have a lot of mental health issues that I struggle with, and I'm a whole person that has human needs and deserves help and is okay to get help. So these are the things that we kind of want to look at, y'all, because these are the deeper roots that we don't always see. Chris, want to advance the slide, or do you have anything you want to add to this one?
Nope, you nailed it. Yeah, there's so much there. I just love this conversation because it's just a time to think. As a Midwesterner, I also feel like I have that hard work ethic, that you don't complain, You don't stop. I grew up from a farm family where you get up before the sun, you go to bed after the work is done, when and if the work gets done. I think it really ties into that idea of stigma, of asking for help, of being vulnerable, of not being self-sufficient. That's a value shift. And when I hear you talk about your hard work ethic, Alex, I always love how you talk about it being a both and. It is a great value, a source of strength. I think it makes you made you an amazing peer support provider and a rock star social worker. And it also can be a barrier for you if it becomes more important working harder than it does thinking about this as a training where I need rest and recovery in order to continue sustaining long term. So I'm gonna tie all of this into some of the tenets of white supremacy, and our last slide has the website where we took this information from with great gratitude. But the first tenet we talk about is perfectionism, and Alex mentioned it already. But here's what we say or think of as what is when it comes to perfectionism and how it ties into this incredible crisis of turnover and harm being absorbed by helpers who are either leaving the field or absorbing so much harm that they aren't as effective as they any longer want to be in the field. And perfection to me is this internalized expectation that I have the right answers. I avoid wasting time, and people always deserve the very best practices, even when I'm not necessarily sure what that means, or that what best practices for you are maybe not what I think are best practices for someone else. The way that I've recognized this in my life have been the moments where I felt bad or hesitated or just didn't ask families for anything in return when I was working with them, including their lived expertise, their wisdom, their experiences, their needs, their culture, all the things that I couldn't do ever my best work without that information. So even though I was approaching families with the best intentions of not asking them to do one more thing, by being sucked into this idea that I was supposed to know because I had the job or the letters behind my name that somehow made me think that I was supposed to be perfect, what it did was it made me always fall short in actually partnering with families. Because listen, if you come from a place of trying to know everything, any effort to partner is going to feel tokenizing at some level, right? And as I listen to the plenary with so many examples of systems demanding things, including Euphemia talking about how she wasn't allowed to have needs at work. She had to divorce her personal life from her role as a director of a program. I think it just reminded me that our wisdom comes from the intersectionality of our lived experiences and our humanity and our need for help and our willingness to help others. And yet this perfectionism, I think, keeps us silent about that source of wisdom. Alex, I think you were gonna.
Yeah. And thank you for that. I think when we talk about like the what is and what could be, kind of like this antidote to perfectionism, right? Where we can practice, this idea of saying, can you help me understand? Or I don't know that. Or am I the only one that didn't get that? These questions are okay to ask. And I want to share this, from someone that has been a client within these systems. I had a therapist one time, and I had come out to her because I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And you know what? She's a great therapist. Nobody knows everything about everything. And she actually told me, I know a lot about this and that, but I don't know about this particular part. Can you share with me what it's like for you to X, Y, and Z? And that was actually one of the most validating experiences I had, because she owned the fact that she didn't know something, but that was okay, because that opened up the conversation for us to partner more together in my treatment. So ask the questions. Would you help me understand? And, the other thing that I say to myself too, y'all, is I'm not dumb for not knowing. I am brave for being the one courageous enough to ask, because I guarantee you there's probably someone else in that room wanting to ask the same thing.
Yes. The next one that we want to talk about is this combination of the urgency with the quantity over quality. And what is this need to always do everything more and do it now, which ultimately means that my work is about the number of people I help and how quickly I help them, which, if you step back from it, very quickly becomes the number of transactions, not transformations. Alex?
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that a lot. And I think about actually one of the things that a group and I was a part of did together recently. I was a part of a group that connected together around developing a suicide prevention resource for youth and young adults. That's a really hard topic because a lot of us on that group making that resource are people with lived experience. We started this group off like any other meeting would. Didn't really check in with each other, just, kind of going through the motions. We found out, though, very shortly after that making the time to connect as human beings during these calls and these times together was absolutely crucial to developing a product that was quality, but to also keeping each other well throughout the process. So we spent probably 10 or 15 minutes during a lot of our calls checking in together. How is the work impacting you? What's going on in your life right now? Like, what do you need right now? Making the time for the connection, I feel like has absolutely made our work more quality. Not rushing, just respecting that process and checking in like that and being human.
Absolutely. And I think I learned that practice mostly from systems of care folks. And what I also learned is that it was often done sort of underground because it wasn't documented and it wasn't billable. Therefore, it was just the extra. It wasn't necessarily the work. And what you did with that workshop and that project, Alex, was make it the work in a way that was so much more authentic. So then there's this idea of hoarding. Again, what is? When we asked you to imagine what it would be like to have the basic resources you need, it stemmed from this issue of hoarding and the sense that there's never enough. That we accept this premise that there is never enough, there's a finite amount of wellness or resources, and we absolutely, when we get some, have to hold on to it because otherwise we will never get our needs met. So power becomes the source of self-protection because we don't necessarily work in systems where we feel we will otherwise be protected. And so what that means is that it makes it even harder to ask for help, to be vulnerable and not knowing, because power is about protection and being vulnerable puts you at risk, which, again, back to sort of the goal of doing this work, makes sharing power with families the opposite of what we're practicing in our systems, and makes it so much harder for us to develop trust and transparency because the community we're trying to build has an element of competition for limited resources always in its core. Alex?
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. And I think one of the examples that kind of sticks out to me is like when we're thinking about this, what could be, to power hoarding is that there's been a couple times where I attended this thing called a community of practice, and I didn't know what that was until my internship, but it was a group of people that came together to talk about a specific topic or issue that was common to them. And in one of these community of practice groups that I was in, this community of practice, the space was co-owned, the culture was co-created and co-owned, and so was the process. And so as the group kind of developed its own co-owned process and structure, there was no power structure or authority. We were just co-owning the space and the process. And that's what really made this authentic and genuine and made the space for that connection and just real honest conversation.
And then my favorite worst, conflict avoidance. And it's my favorite worst because of how pervasive conflict avoidance feels in my field and in myself. My theory is that this comes from white supremacy, where being polite is taught and talking through hard situations or differences in perspective is not taught. But I also think in the world of child trauma, it's reinforced by our experience of trauma, where our bodies have experienced threat or harm and have become more hypervigilant to risk, because that's what brains and bodies exposed to threat and harm do. I've also been paying a lot more attention to this idea of experiential avoidance. I practice saying that out loud without stumbling, and I think I almost got through it. But it's this idea psychologists offer that we move as human beings towards things that feel good and away from things that feel uncomfortable, which in the short run makes a lot of sense, right? Connection, comfort, security are pleasant and are so important. But if that's only short-term goals, and in the long run, for choosing comfort and security over working through conflict that will give you long-term comfort, security, and growth, then we're actually moving towards things that sabotage our long-term efforts. And so the white supremacy, the hypervigilance to risk, and this experiential avoidance come together, make addressing conflict and working through it just so hard. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, and I think, working through that, I've seen in a couple spaces, just for instance, I have a colleague of mine where every meeting that we have together, for the most part, at the end of that meeting together, we do a thing of like, what did work well for this time together? What didn't work for you today? We normalize when there's these things that come up, because that's going, back to that community, right? And noticing and being curious about conflict as is to address it and to bring it out. And I love when we do that kind of exercise at the end of those meetings, because there's been a lot of times where I've walked away from something and I felt like maybe we should have addressed that, or we should have spent some time around that. And so doing kind of like that, what did and what didn't work for folks today, kind of can open up a lot of good discussion. Do you want to add anything to that, Chris? Because we've shared a lot of spaces, especially where we've kind of done that together.
No, other than the fact that it's always easier to do it when we are together.
That is true. Yes.
Because it is really a really heavy lift.
It is. Yes, thank you for that, Chris. So this is an interesting visual that we've put together, because as we've kind of done this work, we've noticed that, doing this stuff together is better. And I just kind of want folks to take a look at this and look at the, if you look at the cycle graphic on the left, talk about this a little bit and what it really means. You'll notice here that we've got a couple folks in kind of like this hierarchy, and you've got a little person kind of just sitting out there on the sidelines on their own. This is to talk about the fact that a lot of times, trauma and things happen within our communities and within our worlds. And a lot of times what happens is our society a lot of times sees behaviors from people that they believe needs to be addressed, or there needs to be a treatment modality that is brought to the attention and is given to them as an intervention, without so much though as that person's own experience and own involvement within that process of healing. So a lot of times when we're trying to have these conversations, or as systems, we're trying to engage in communities or with other people that are going through hard things, there's such a disconnect here, and people end up being shamed or othered because we're not having this we conversation. It's turning more into an us versus them rather than a we doing this together. When we do, though, experience trauma or adversities within our communities and in our lives, if we come together, though, kind of on this right side, where, you kind of see these groups of people, you've got some folks that have their arms around each other, identifying like this is a collective, connected community working together. If community and system can come together and partner together, then that's what can help address a lot of the adversities that we deal with. And that's what also kind of helps promote this whole healing process, right? Because it's, you know, Chris, you've said this to me before: hurt people hurt more people, but healthy people working together can help make other people healthier too. And so instead of having our little guy out here who's just alone and being othered and is not included in this conversation, if we kind of come together and recognize that, you know what, listen, hey, I go to the same grocery store as the next person, you know what I mean? We're all in this one community together. If we can collectively partner and bring in that lived expertise and kind of own that everyone has different strengths and different ways to contribute to this work, not only do these events, right? Not only do we limit some of these traumatic events, but we also heal with each other through this process together. And so that's kind of this idea of like what is versus what could be. And I got to be honest, I'm really loving the what could be aspect of this, because now we're healing together, we're partnering together. There's not this othering and that stigma and that shame and blame that goes out the window in that respect. And Chris, this is kind of our first time, you know, talking about this visual and this image. Do you want to add anything to this one?
No, I just love the fact that it is a visual image of when someone is harmed, we are all harmed, and we all have strengths and we all have needs, in a way that the othering is the word that always comes to my mind, Alex. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was great. So we wanted to offer 3 different concrete things or semi-concrete things that we did as we decided, now we've seen what is, or our version of what is, our definition. And we've talked about what could be. Now, how did we start to pivot towards the what could be? How did we become disruptors and dismantlers of what is? And the first thing that we were going to share is our approach to Alex's supervision. Like all things in my career, this was one of those where it started with my moment of my own sense of hypocrisy and just like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't do this like this anymore. Fortunately, Alex and I have worked together for quite a while. We knew each other through the NCTSN, and we had a really great relationship, and we were bonded over this commitment to trauma-informed care. And then fortunately for me, we ended up getting matched together for Alex's graduate school internship. And I think we both quickly realized that what brought us together was our commitment to trauma-informed care. But once our relationship turned into this intern supervisor thing, neither of us had any paths to follow to do that in a trauma-informed way. Everything both of us had experienced in training, in job apprenticeship, in school, was built on this idea that I get as much free labor as I possibly can wring out of you, and hopefully you learn something along the way. Because the kids and families deserve everything. We don't have enough, so we got some free labor, we're going to use it. So we, again, hypocrisy. Oh my God, I can't do that. So what can we do? And so we created some structures. We messed up along the way because we are not practicing perfectionism. And what we did was we crafted in an internship that started out with the question, what do you want to learn? What are your needs? What do you already know? And how do you want to use this experience to build the career you want to have? So this not only put the focus of the internship on Alex and not just on what they had to offer, although of course they had a ton to offer, it was also a springboard for us to develop a relationship that was beyond the day-to-day transactions of the daily tasks and imagining Alex's future and how we could help them get there. Then we created a structure for because the school required an hour once a week of supervision. And we created a structure that started every single conversation with Alex sharing a sense of compassion, satisfaction. And I think they've almost forgiven me for that because you hated every minute of it. Ironically, it was the hardest thing I think you had to do in your internship, which I get. It's hard to talk about the things that you do that's amazing. And oh my God, if good work is supposed to feel good, we need to learn how to make it feel good and notice all the beautiful moments day to day, even when it's hard to think of them, that you're contributing. Talk about protective factors, talk about resilience and wellness. Then within our structure, we had a list of everything that Alex was doing, what they were doing, how they were doing it, why they were doing it, and also what they didn't know yet. To absolutely put in structure, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, and they're equally normal. I hate that word normal, but equally valid. And then I remember this moment too, where I was like, Alex it was a tough call, Alex, you can talk about it in a minute, but you needed to process, you needed to think, you needed to integrate, you needed to cope, and you needed time to do that. And instead of saying, well, when the workday is done, go do self-care, I said, if you need to go and walk to process this, and you go for a 5-mile walk, those are internship hours, because integrating and processing the experience at work is not self-care, it is the work.
Yeah, absolutely. You ring true to me, Chris. That was exactly the experience. And it was absolutely shocking. I kid you not, you all. I sat there. There was one day we went through something really difficult with work. I can't remember what it was, but Chris told me to go on a walk, just take a break, go do what you need to do. And she's like, and make sure you write it down for your internship hours. I was absolutely shocked. Because we work in systems and live in a place where it's like, unless you're answering the phone or you're meeting with somebody or whatever, doing your notes or whatever, that's not really seen as like being productive or doing the work. And so, after going through this supervision experience, which was totally something completely different that I had never been a part of before, I feel like I actually have a greater awareness of my own worth and value. And I don't accept less than what I deserved or what I deserve. And my career, it looks different because of this. It looks way different because of this. And I'm honestly more of a disruptor, honestly, of this supremacist and stigmatizing status quo. I really feel like going forward from this has absolutely created a springboard for me into a lot of the work that I'm passionate about in this field and in these professions.
Yeah, and just in case it sounds like it was one directional, it absolutely wasn't by any stretch, because as Alex was going through these experiences, I was discovering them at the same time, 20 plus years later in my career. And I felt like I was learning something at 51 that you were learning at 23, and yay and wow. So the next thing we did, the next sort of concrete strategy we did was this idea of using community. So when I said in the introduction that what I was recognizing is that people were feeling super isolated and were suffering, I felt like I was having the same conversation over and over and over again. And it was talking to people who were hurting, who wanted and needed, I think, to know it wasn't just them, but they weren't believing me when I told them that, because they didn't need someone to tell them, they needed to experience it. So we created a community of practice, a few of them actually. And the point was to focus on pulling people together to reduce isolation and practice being witnesses and witnessing each other. And again, as a ongoing, lifelong reforming type A person who struggles with perfectionism and wasting time, this was really radical for me to not have a project or a to-do thing, but to really prioritize time to connect. It was scary. It was also probably one of the most powerful things I've done in the last, I don't know how many years. But what we did was we practiced holding conversations in circles so everyone spoke, everyone listened. As Alex said, the goal and the process was always co-created. And the beauty was that everyone had the equal opportunity to share and receive wisdom of others in a way that helped them connect, know that they weren't alone, and also feel inspired to continue to do the work, to continue to focus on their own well-being, and to continue to make systems change. Alex?
Chris, thank you for that. Chris, I'm having some I'm having some technical difficulties. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I think I know what you were going to say.
I'm going to exit this and I'm going to come right back. Okay. Can you pick up for me?
Got it. You got it. I think I know what Alex was going to say. And what Alex was going to say is that and we talked about this, obviously, the experience of not jumping in, not being able or allowed to jump in when someone was sharing a story to try and fix it or offer advice was the powerful piece. We are just going to put it out there and not
In the worst tech time.
And not, that's okay. It's a theme today, tech support, not perfectionism. Being able to hear and witness people and not be fixed, that it's okay to share my pain because it doesn't take away the fact that I still have agency to make myself okay. All right. So then the third thing we did was a little bit less concrete and also extremely powerful. And it was a change in our language. We started saying out loud and often that people can be good at being helpers and need help too, and they don't cancel each other out. We started saying things like you can be super strong while also carrying broken pieces within you, and it can be both equally true. And we started saying things like, that's not okay. When we heard a colleague struggling or going through something that felt harmful as a result of trying to be a helper or just function in this world. And interestingly enough, that tagline, that's not okay, really started to feel like the paradigm shift that we saw in our work when we started to say, you're not a bad person, bad things have just happened to you. It shifted the focus, it shifted the responsibility, and it offered an invitation to step out of the judgment. And then finally, we started to say no, or not now, or maybe later, way more often. And we defined it as an act of courage, an act of modeling, and an act of disrupting stigma and white supremacy, not as a source of our own personal failings or guilt, because we weren't doing more. So I am going to invite you to do something that also feels a little rebellious. We created a handout, and what we want to do is invite you to spend the next 10 minutes. For those of you who are on video, turning it off if you want, but to just think. And I'll throw a Google version in the chat in just a second, but it's also in the conference presentation along with our PowerPoints. But it's a tool to reflect and notice where in your life is stigma and the culture of white supremacy showing up and as a barrier to your own wellness, and where would you like to perhaps think about saying no or being a disruptor. There is nobody out there who is going to notice if you spend the next 10 minutes on your email or grabbing a snack. This is an invitation just to think, because thinking is part of the work. And our hypothesis is that we don't build in hours a day to think, to learn, to grow, to reflect in a way that allows us to not only be well, but be the best versions of ourselves for others. So I'm going to turn off my audio. There's lots of opportunity to talk in the chat if you're a verbal processor. I will put another link in the chat in just a second if you can't get this on the conference website. Otherwise, I am going to start the 10-minute countdown now. All right, so we'd like to invite you to finish up your thought. Hopefully this was a useful experience to take time to think. Again, I just have to put it out there that as a person who does training to shut off the mics and not speak at someone for a full 10 minutes on a virtual webinar feels really wild, which is exactly why I do it, because it's not easy, which means it feels like it's putting wellness ahead of the status quo. Alex, you ready to wrap us up and finish our day or our session?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm gonna switch into our slide. All right, y'all. So this is kind of our last slide for our session today, but we've got about a few more minutes left. And so Chris and I just kind of wanted to open it up. If you want to come off mute or maybe go in the chat, just whatever you're comfortable with, we wanted to ask, what are you taking with you from today? And I wanted to share with you a story that came from the internship that Chris had talked about earlier. When I met Chris and then we were talking about that value again that I mentioned, that hard work and everything, back several years ago, I used to be quite the runner. And I remember one time when I was in my teens, I ran up this really big hill and I ran up and I got so sick. I threw up and then I ran it up again just to prove to people that I could still do it. And that's the type of way that I was practicing at the time in a lot of my work and a lot of my life. And when I got with Chris for this internship, she really, this topic, and you, Chris, you helped me kind of see this. You helped me see that in a lot of a different way. And I think that I practice so much differently now. I don't run up the hill like that anymore. I rest. I take the time that I need for myself. I can be a hard worker and I can rest and I can care and I can heal and I can be a helper and need help too. So we're curious about you all though. What are you taking with you from today, from this session together that we had? Feel free to come off mute if you'd like to share or maybe post in the chat. We've got a few more minutes together and would love to hear from some folks. And if you have any questions too, feel free to put those out there.
I was going to write this in the chat, but
Hey, Jerry.
Hey, how are you, Miss Chris? I was going to write this in the chat and decided it's too long. This worksheet that you have is really great and wonderful. The one that I was reflecting on that I'm taking home with me is kind of a confirmation of what I do is the right thing that can be helpful. And that is, what can you do to slow down your work? How can we capture the process and quality aspects of our work and communicate the importance of those in a data-driven world? I am very close and partner well with our evaluators. And, they're always showing us data. And what I like to do is to bring that family, real person story that reflects exactly what the data shows us. Because some people like numbers, some people's eyes just glaze over, and it means a lot to hear a story that's related and confirms the data. So that's kind of where I'm going with mine today.
That was awesome. Thank you, Jerry, for getting us started. Who wants to go?
I wanted to mention in the chat real quick while anyone is thinking about typing. Heidi said that it was really helpful and so appreciated. And she says, I'm so glad our organization isn't the only one with the same feelings. And I think that is just so powerful, the testament of coming together and making this community together today. And Cindy says the idea that saying no or not now or maybe later is an act of courage and of modeling healthy self-care to those with whom we work, not an act of selfishness or laziness, is something I'm committed to remembering and acting upon. I love that, Cindy. Thank you for that.
Cindy, I would also, we've recently really tried to use more accountability with each other on our teams. And that means asking, when do you need this by? So that we're not feeling that we're late because we've put our own box around that. Mm-hmm. Or if we have more than one thing, asking which one do you need first, which really helps us not do that everything at once mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll add to that, Alex, just, oh, heck yeah. And accountability to wellness too. Like Alex will look at me and go, really? You're saying yes to that? And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. Okay. And we just, again, I wouldn't try and go on a diet on my own. I'm let everybody know around me that, don't make brownies. So I'm trying to make this shift. I'm like, letting my people around me know so that they can help me hold me accountable to the things that I want to do differently because they care. And I'm going to let them care for me by doing that. Go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to mention too, we got a couple of things come in the chat. One comment says, as a former social worker myself, I've learned over the years the critical need for self-care. Latriva says to use our individually strengths together to work together, but also remember to support each other and to check in more. I totally agree with that. And Teresa says, reflecting on ways to make space for conflict in safe ways is so important.
Hello, how are you all?
Wonderful.
Great. Beryl here from Federations of Families of South Carolina. I was just going to say, Alex and I don't want to get your name wrong, Chris, you both showed strength as a team, especially when your computer started acting up. That to me shows great teamwork. And when Chris said, Alex, you asked her, you gonna read that? I was like, yeah, that's what colleagues are supposed to do. They're supposed to support each other when things are not working as well as everyone thinks it should, because things happen, right?
Yeah.
So supporting each other when those things happen, and just reminding their colleague that, hey, no, we can't take this on as a group because that may be a little bit too much for the both of us. I know you want to do it, but sometimes it's okay to say no. It's okay to sometimes just say, I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I want to share.
Absolutely, Beverly. No, that resonated with me completely. And I'll just share that, working with Chris for as long as we've had together over the last year and a half or so, pretty closely, and kind of, that internship supervision structure that we set up. I mean, I really feel like that was the foundation for how you see us now, even interacting in this call together, and the way that Beverly, you just mentioned. I mean, you're there for each other. You come in when you need. I mean, my computer died. I didn't have to worry about a thing because I know I got someone that's got my back. I think that's a huge piece of this. I really do. And I've got a couple in the chat. Megan Graham says, I'm taking the reminder to give myself and others grace and space to make mistakes, to care for myself, and to find the joy in this work again. And Heidi says, give yourself the grace and compassion you want others to have for themselves.
Can I just jump in really quick to so many different points that are being said now that I feel like I want to piggyback off of. One of them, and I know I'm probably going to lose one at some point. This is Taylor Ford from Favor in Connecticut. But one of my colleagues always says, one of my teammates always talks about, I give grace and space. I give grace and space. And so I had to, Chris, you had mentioned like pretty much having that team, like you're not doing things by yourself. I had asked her on multiple occasions, so when do you give yourself that grace and space? Because at one point it was like a joke for folks when we first went virtual. or first one remote back in, was that March 2020? Feels so long ago now. That, oh, well, you can just, you can do it, on the weekend. I said, oh, no. Just because I can, does not mean that I will. And so that changed very quickly my idea of my perception, or my perspective on busy versus productive. And the fact that if you want me to do because so it looks like I'm busy, that's not fulfilling or beneficial to either one of us. So if we want to be productive, that's very different. Being productive can take 20 minutes of an hour and a half. That doesn't mean we have to fill the whole rest of the time, but also your urgency is not your, what do I always say? Now I can't remember the saying that I say. But like, it's like something like your lack of like timing is not my sense of urgency, right? Because just because you missed it or you decided to put it off does not mean that it's now my responsibility at the end of the day to say, oh yeah, no, I'll stay at all this extra time to do what you knew was due, right? And so, and the other point, just to piggyback off Beverly, was this is how team is supposed to work. Like we're supposed to be working as a team, but also for me, at least I can only speak for myself, it shows the humanity, and it shows the humanity of the folks that are working to the families and communities that we're working with. Because if I pretend to be perfect all of the time, if I'm a family member or a community member, I don't want to come to you with my vulnerability, because there's no sense of, you're not giving me anything. So if we mess up all the time, and I tell people that at my job, and I'm like, in a presentation, if you say you forgot a thought, say that. And that's, being very, reminding yourself that you're also human. You can't just do it for the people that you're working for or working with. You have to do it for yourself as well.
And all of that not only makes me or us healthier, it changes the system, because it's dismantling the system that holds us into this sense of we can never make a mistake or we can never be vulnerable. And to wrap up, I just thank you so much for talking with us. I was a little scared for a second that y'all had left to do the worksheet and never came back. So thank you. That was really fun. And so powerful to hear the thoughts and your wisdom shared back at us. And thank you for sharing this space with us today. We are going to end 2 minutes early because I cannot stand ending 2 minutes late. Go be well, and thank you so much. Take care. Have a great conference.